Went and checked out the Reagan movie over the weekend because, of course, that's what cool people do. It's a biopic. They didn't really miss anything. The only element I wish that they would have kept in there was the Challenger. William, I think you're the only one old enough on this call to remember the Challenger blowing up, but that was the only part that they missed. Are you guys planning on seeing it?
You go ahead, Cosmin.
Well, from what you've told me about it, absolutely. And Dennis Quaid is in it. I mean, he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and it was a great appearance. And he seems to have a lot of sympathies that I think we all share.
I'm absolutely going to see it. I adore Reagan, and that Challenger speech, I remember it, where he ends with that poem where he says, "They slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God." I think it was just a wonderful speech he gave.
Yeah, speaking of that, actually, the one element that I didn't see Peggy Noonan in there, which was one of his writers at the time, and but I must say, start to finish, it was reverent is the term that I would use, and the look on Mr. Quaid's face at the very end of it, when of course we all knew that he was leaving us, and he wrote that final goodbye letter, there wasn't a dry eye in the theater, and Mr. Quaid did a really good job. Anyway, I wanted to ask you guys if you were going to go watch it because I went and watched it by myself and I thought they did a really good job. But we've got a lot going on in Canada right now, so we should probably get this thing started. Welcome to Off the Record. My name is Kris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. You might remember me from such shows as The Andrew Lawton Show here on True North, but Andrew's out there busy pounding lawn signs in and kissing babies, so we wish him all the best. I'm joined now by two of my friends, William McBeath and Cosmin Dzsurdzsa, both with True North. Guys, we have a lot to talk about here, mostly, right now. Ottawa is all in a Twitter. The terrarium, at least, is in a Twitter. Are we now closer than we were to a federal election? Because did we just watch a big breakup between Jagmeet Singh and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? I'm not sure. Who wanted to take that? William, do you want to jump on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, Neil Sedaka had a great song called "Breaking Up Is Hard to Do," and I think he may have written it about Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau, because it took Jagmeet Singh years to break up with this, I mean, maybe not abusive partner, but someone who was doing him absolutely no good. So I think we have a clip of Mr. Singh's goodbye letter to Mr. Trudeau.
Today, I notified the Prime Minister that I've ripped up the supply and confidence agreement. Canadians are fighting a battle for the future of the middle class. Justin Trudeau has proven again and again he will always cave to corporate greed. The Liberals have let people down. They don't deserve another chance. There is an even bigger battle ahead. The threat of Pierre Poilievre and conservative cuts from workers, from retirees, from young people, from patients, from families. He will cut in order to give more to big corporations and wealthy CEOs.
You know, it's so funny. You have to watch Mr. Singh and in some ways feel just a little bit bad for him, because the guy so clearly in over his head being the leader of a political party. He just gave away all of his political power to keep Justin Trudeau in office. And, you know, every time he came out to complain about Justin Trudeau and the Liberals doing this or doing that, you know, the first question put to him is, but you're the one keeping him in power. You're the one enabling his government to survive. You want to stop Mr. Trudeau? Well, you're the one who has the power to do it. So why won't you? And his answer was always something like, and he had no justification. So the fact that he's now finally ripped it up, it must be, in my opinion, a reflection of those very low polling numbers that the New Democrats are seeing right now. Cosmin, what do you think?
Well, look, I also wonder how that conversation went down. Did Jagmeet Singh call Prime Minister Justin Trudeau with the same serious tone and tough guy attitude he had in that video, or was it more bittersweet like traditional breakups go? And it's funny because this is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's second separation. He separated from his political wife, Jagmeet Singh, and I can't take him seriously. As you mentioned, he's constantly defending the Liberals. He's voting their way, and this just seems to be entirely for appearance sake.
Yeah, I would jump in on that. I think we have a clip here of a more recent element of it. So I've been around the Hill a long time. I worked there for roughly 20 years. So I've seen this sort of political theater before. That's all this was. This whole I'm ripping up the agreement, I'm throwing his stuff on the lawn. Like, this was a lot of dramatics without actual substance. Because, of course, what matters in a minority parliament is a confidence vote. So, to your point, William, he's going to be asked these same questions on case by case basis, as he put it, now until the election actually happens. I think we have a clip here of a very recent news conference where reporters were basically asking Mr. Singh, why are we here?
If Pierre Poilievre moves a non-confidence motion, will you support it?
In terms of any motion moving forward, we're going to look at that motion before we decide. We're not going to presuppose an outcome of that. But I've ripped up the agreement with Justin Trudeau. And I know that means that an election has now become more likely. We are ready to fight an election whenever that happens. And when that election comes, the choice is going to be between Pierre Poilievre and conservative cuts who want to literally destroy our healthcare system. Want to make it so that the only way you can get care is if you can afford to pay for it out of pocket. Or New Democrats who want to fix our healthcare system, build it up so it is there for you and your loved ones when you need it. That is a choice in the next election.
Yeah, so that was Mr. Sweeney. He's an old school reporter from CHCH there in Hamilton that was asking him that off the top. I found that interesting, guys, that very quickly, as soon as he was finished his speech about ripping up the agreement, most of the reporters asked him questions like that of, okay, when?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, ripping up the agreement means nothing if the New Democrats are going to continue to vote to keep the Liberal government in power for the next 12 or 14 months until the next election happens under the fixed election law. So, and I love that line. Well, we'll have to see what the motion says. Well, what if the motion just happened to say, we have no confidence in the Liberal government? We're not asking for anything particularly complicated here. And it shouldn't take you more than a couple seconds, I would say, to figure out how you're going to vote on that issue. But of course, we also know that some have suggested that Mr. Singh's political strategy is motivated less by his party's policy and ideology and more about the fact that he still needs a little more time in order to qualify for that very generous government-funded pension plan. That if he gets just a few more months in office, he'll walk away with a pension worth millions of dollars. And, I guess only he knows in his own heart what is true, whether he's doing this out of conscience or he's doing it out of self-interest. But I would have to believe that if he genuinely believes the Liberals are bad for Canada, if he genuinely believes they're wrong for families, then he would be voting to get rid of this government at the first opportunity.
Putting personal ambitions aside, there was another reporter who put a question to Jagmeet Singh because the NDP, the federal NDP, is tied to their provincial counterparts, and there's an election coming up in BC right now. And I think if Jagmeet Singh were to force an election, it would totally tear that provincial federal tie apart because he's going to make it about him when the provincial parties, especially in British Columbia and Saskatchewan, are trying to form government in the next election season. And I think part of that holds him back, and he's not willing to admit support for any non-confidence motion. And there's all sorts of reasons behind that, as we've mentioned.
Yeah, for the next couple of months at least, just in practical terms, a lot of their ground game is out in BC right now. So they're going to be the ones that are doing get out the vote. They're going to be the ones knocking on doors or the ones handing out the granola bars to all their little, volunteers that are going to be campaigning. And so a lot of parties will share staff and people will move back and forth. But the NDP in particular is the same party. It's the same structure. It isn't just there's some friends among staff. No, this is the actual same structure, same constitution.
And Kris, there's already been threats of separation coming from Manitoba and elsewhere. They're not totally unified. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the provincial counterparts see Singh as a liability because of his closeness to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. They're tied together. Their fates are intertwined to some degree.
Yeah, for sure. The new Alberta NDP leader, Naheed Nenshi, he's already made kind of rumblings like this. Now, I haven't been able to pin him down on a provincial carbon tax yet. I know one of his predecessors who was running for the leadership and then bowed out actually came out and said the consumer carbon tax is dead. Like, we shouldn't be doing this provincially either here in Alberta. Say we got rid of it federally, we shouldn't have one here in Alberta again, which was really important. You've probably noticed, William, too, because of course it was the NDP Premier Rachel Notley that invented her own here in Alberta. So to hear any NDP candidate, leadership candidate say, you know what, that's dead, that was really significant. And I don't know where Nenshi stands on that. I keep asking him, but we don't know yet. But you're right, absolutely right, Cosmin. There is now this kind of, there's a bit of turbulence, I would describe it, ideological turbulence between the provincial elements of the NDP and the federal elements of the NDP. William, what do you think is going to happen with Mr. Singh after this announcement? Do you think they're just going to keep putting pressure on him internally?
It's a great question. I don't think he's going to have any easier of a political future post this announcement than he did heading into it. Of all of the federal parties, I would say that the New Democrats are probably the least ready to have a full-scale national election. They've still got a ton of work to do nominating candidates. They've got a lot of work to do raising money. They have to get a platform together. And he's still, I think, dealing with internal divisions in his party, dealing with the fact that so many blue-collar union workers have fled the New Democrats to support Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives because they see a better path forward under a Conservative government than a New Democrat party that has really become a party of inner big cities, not the same working class party it always used to be. So, no, I'm not expecting much from him. He'll find ways to support this government, either directly or indirectly. Maybe just New Democrats won't show up for some key votes, just enough to keep the Liberals in power. But he's going to continue getting asked those very same questions. If this government is truly as bad as you say it is, why don't you put them out of their misery? Why don't you send Canadians to the polls?
Interesting. You point out that it could be that the NDP, at least at the federal level, is losing some of its seed corn, some of its base, right? The really urban voters. Now, I would argue that's largely because people can't afford things, period. They can't afford rent. They can't afford food. They can't afford the basics. They can't afford fuel. And so that's when the rubber really hits the road. And if all they're getting with answers from Mr. Singh is kind of more philosophical things and not we are going to scrap the carbon tax or we are going to balance the budget to kill inflation, real meat and potato things like that, I think they're going to drift to some other person who is promising them those things. Cosmin, you were doing a little bit of work over on the other side, on the other team, looking at Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's leadership of the Liberals. And what you were finding is that he could be losing some of what I guess you could describe as his natural voting base. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, for sure. I mean, in Quebec, there's a by-election happening in Montreal right now, and they're not even willing to use his face on their campaign signs. They're putting the candidates forward, whereas before you saw in past elections, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's face was plastered everywhere. Everybody wanted to have pictures taken with him, but now they've kind of sidelined him, put him in the background because they know how unpopular he is. So how do you think this is going to reflect on the next election? Are they just simply going to not show Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? I'll put it to you, William, first.
Yeah, it was a bad week all around for Prime Minister Trudeau. He's losing friends left, right, and center, or left and far from the center. But he's losing support in Montreal, which was arguably the last remaining Liberal bastion in the country. He's now losing support from the LGBTQ community. They put out a couple senior people from different organizations, including Egal Canada, have called on him to step down in order to apparently improve the Liberals' chances of winning. And as if that weren't bad enough, well, he's lost the support apparently of his own campaign director, who very recently just announced he was stepping down because possibly he didn't want to lead the Liberal campaign if it was going to be an utter crushing defeat. That doesn't look good on a campaign manager's resume. So no, the Prime Minister's friends are apparently fleeing the sinking ship as we speak.
That's interesting. So I just finished what we would call a debt clock tour, and that is where we took our gigantic, debt clock with the big screen on it showing the $1.2 trillion debt that we have here in Canada. And what I was struck by is we only had short notice to give to our supporters because we were frankly just moving it across the province and wanted to use the gas money because we had to go park it back in Saskatchewan. We're very frugal with our donors' money. So we had a couple of quick pub nights. I was overwhelmed by how many people showed up to these things with like a day and a half notice. And what was really interesting is that in places like Red Deer and Edmonton, we were getting people out that I hadn't met before. And the reason why is, again, to keep pounding on this, is just how dire straits that people are in. And I think that might be why Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is losing what he would probably assume is natural support base. Right? I don't know who said it, but a friend of mine says it quite often. You can't save the world if you can't pay the rent. And it's just so true. And so a lot of these other issues might be taking a back seat or a back burner because Prime Minister Trudeau's government has overseen the unaffordability of pretty much everything. To put the debt in perspective, they've doubled it. So picture John A. Macdonald and Laurier and Diefenbaker and King and all those folks who were prime minister during times of, drought and depression and world wars, all that time. Take all their debts, including the first Trudeau, double it. That's what they've done. And then they printed around $300 billion out of thin air, which made inflation skyrocket while they locked down businesses at the same time. So it was like the perfect storm. And so I think that is why we are seeing these polls just going like this and them losing more support. My question to both of you, though, William, you may know, because I actually don't, because I don't have enough people on the inside there. Are there adults in the room, so to speak? So back in the day when we saw, for example, former Prime Minister Paul Martin turn around and say, I no longer have confidence in Jean Chrétien, I'm paraphrasing. There was a big bun fight and then they took over. There were always these kind of elders in the party. There were always the adults in the room to, put the hand on the shoulder and say, buddy, it's time to take a walk in the snow. Like, let's go. Are those people there in Ottawa when it comes to the Liberals now, or has the regime changed so much?
Yeah, it's a great question. I certainly think there's nobody within the organization who has any ability to tell the Prime Minister, it's time to go. I think he's built an operation who only tells him what he wants to hear. And it's things like, you're doing a great job, you're just misunderstood. If only you had better communications. Canadians would love your policy agenda. It's unbelievable. And, you did see that attempt in the summer to maybe bring in an outsider. They wooed Mark Carney pretty hard to come back. And I think, frankly, he took one look at the current Liberal government and said, no way am I attaching myself to that bandwagon. It's like saying, do you want to hitch your lifeboat to the Titanic after it's already hit the iceberg and been sinking for 2 hours? He said, no, I'm going to stay in my very cushy job that I'm enjoying now as a global elite, and I'll wait for the next one. So no, I don't think there is any grown-up left in that Liberal government who's there to say, Prime Minister, you need to go.
Cosmin, what's your read on this? Do you think he's going to lose more what he would consider base support?
Well, I wonder how much of this has to do with the Liberals putting all their eggs in the environment basket. They've pushed environmental policies from day one. And Kris, you would be great to add to this because the carbon tax, I think, contributes to this a lot. Polls are showing that Canadians view affordability, cost of living as a more important policy issue than the environment. And the Liberals have essentially branded themselves as these progressive, first-class leaders when it comes to pushing environmental policies that are often crafted in international organizations like the United Nations and the COP summits and all of those things. So there's a huge amount of unpopularity and virtue signaling, quite frankly, when the government is telling you, no, you need to worry about climate change more than, the nickels and dimes that you're left with at the end of the day. And it comes across poorly with Canadians.
That's a great point. There's a lot to tackle there. first, with those, big so-called climate summits that they go to, Canada has shown really poor judgment there. We almost always send the most delegates, even swamping the host countries. So we don't walk the walk, okay? We don't, if you, there's that famous cartoon, I'm sure you've both seen it. It's this younger man and an older man, and they're looking up into the sky, and it's just black with smoke and all of these jets flying. And he says, "Dad, what's that?" And he said, "Politicians flying to the next climate summit." And it's true, right? So there's that little level of hypocrisy, which also, by the way, costs taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars every single time they go to those things. Number two, with the environmentalism issue. So, William, you're old enough to remember, I think, before the carbon tax and CO2 overtook that narrative, there was all sorts of stuff. There was cleaning up, garbage sites. There was literally saving the whales. It was keeping rivers clean. There was all sorts of things that didn't involve taxing people to death for driving their minivan or heating their home, that were environmental elements, and they were good things. It actually reminds me recently, I don't know if you guys saw the recent interview with RFK Jr. I found that pretty interesting, that he said we've been tied, I'm paraphrasing him, we've tied ourselves to this carbon thing instead of looking at broader environmentalism issues. And he's a good person to talk about it because he started River Keepers. I still have my old Mother Earth News magazine with him on the cover of it from the late 80s, early 90s. You can eat fish out of the Hudson River now. They didn't carbon tax to do that. He just made sure to clean up the environment. And so I think you really nailed something there, Cosmin, where the current government will talk a lot about the environment, but then they're bankrupting average working families without anything really to show for it. And the reason why there's nothing really to show for it, of course, is because Canada is responsible for about 1.2% of global emissions. So even if we all joined in and went and lived in a cave or ceased to exist, it wouldn't make a dent in global emissions. So it's not fixing the problem that they had set out to do. If instead we sold, say, natural gas, which is much cleaner, to a huge emitter like India, we would probably be able to get those global emissions down. But that doesn't involve carbon taxing you with, $15 every time you fill up your pickup truck, $400 extra per year just to heat your home. Like those, I think they lost normal people when they did that, Cosmin.
Yeah, and the Liberals have claimed that this is a profit neutral thing, but it's always been about the profit. And their own, parliamentary budget officer shows that Canadians are not making back a neutral, pay-in. They're not getting the money that they put in back. A lot of people are getting shortchanged. And when families sit down at the kitchen table and start discussing their budget and the finances, I'm sure the carbon tax comes into the equation because they're asking themselves, what are we paying for here? We're losing money to funnel to the federal government for, Lord knows what.
Yeah, it's a ton of money. William, did you want to get in on that?
Yeah, I think what conservatives find so frustrating about the carbon tax thing is that the point you make exactly. We could do everything perfectly and it would have zero impact on global carbon emissions until there is significant reduction on the part of China, India, and the United States too, finding better ways to reduce their emissions. It doesn't matter what Canada does. And Canada produces liquefied natural gas, which burns with less than 50% the greenhouse gas emissions of coal. Mm-hmm. And we could have become a global exporter of this cleaner form of energy and sending it to places like China and to India to wean them off coal or to at least reduce the amount of coal they're burning. But instead, we've had a government who just did everything they could to kill that industry, saying, there's no business case for it, which is just, infuriating for those of us who are like, well, except for now there's Qatar and all these other places selling liquefied natural gas to people who wanted to buy it from us, and we don't happen to sponsor terror, which is another real upside to doing business with Canada. And people, I think, forget that conservatives have led a lot of the major environmental initiatives in this country. The Acid Rain Treaty, where we were at risk of having tremendous damage from acid rain due to pollution, air pollution, sulfur dioxide in the sky. That was a conservative government, Brian Mulroney, who implemented leadership with the United States to
Back
get
during
that done.
Reagan. Full
Yes,
circle.
another wonderful thing for President Reagan. God rest him. And conservatives actually go out and see nature. That's another great thing that people forget. That it's by and large conservatives who are the ones who live in rural Canada, who spend their time out in rural Canada, out in nature. Whereas all these people claiming to love the environment, well, they live in skyscrapers in big cities, and they don't really ever go to see nature or spend any time with it. So for the suggestion that conservatives don't care about the environment, completely false.
Yeah, I hear you. Environmentalism was always a big deal to me. I hand sewed my baby's cloth diapers. I've literally swum with the salmon. My nickname is hippie. In all the newsrooms I've ever worked in, almost all my stuff is thrift because I believe in reusing and recycling things. Remember the old 3 R's? Remember all these other elements of being a good environmental steward that wasn't just hung up on the carbon tax, which, by the way, like you pointed out, Cosmin, doesn't work, and it costs you a ton of money. And the government's trying to tell you that if you give them a 20, you'll get back a 50 magically at no cost to you. They're ripping you off. Okay. Anybody with a bit of common sense understands it doesn't work. Hey, speaking of environmentalism, do you want to end on this fun story about the frog?
I think so. I think it's a great story.
Okay. Trigger warning. I was a little bit, true to my environmentalism thing, I was a little bit upset about this. So apparently, Parks Canada, the federal government, spent something like $10,000 over the last few years to cull, which I think meant to kill, one frog. One invasive big honkin' bullfrog. So here you go. Here's our headline from our website here. 4 years, $10,000, one frog. Inside Parks Canada's costly frog cull. That's by Ryan Thorpe. Yes, we have our own full-time investigative journalist on staff at the Taxpayers Federation. Ryan dug through reams of documents through Freedom of Information requests coming from Parks Canada. People might be remembering, didn't they hire helicopter sharpshooters to kill deer? Yes, they did. This is the same group of bureaucrats that hired foreign sharpshooters to shoot deer out of a helicopter. And we spent millions of dollars on this thing. And this is, again, in one of the most kind of earthy, hippy-dippy places that I love in all of Canada. It's in the Gulf Islands of British Columbia. So they apparently had this problem with invasive deer that were eating too many of the plants that they preferred or something. And so the bureaucrats from the federal government, from Parks Canada, blew millions of dollars to shoot a bunch of these deer from helicopters. Now, of course, the questions that flood your mind are, couldn't they find any local hunters? Why did they spend millions of dollars? Why helicopters? But now fast forward, I think I'd laugh if they hadn't actually killed the frog, but I'm kind of sad that they killed the frog. They spent 10 grand trying to get rid of this massive invasive species of big honking bullfrogs. And apparently they got one frog, William.
Yeah, it's an impressive amount of money to kill one single frog. I understand the need to protect ecologically sensitive regions from invasive species.
Sure.
Bullfrogs are jokingly called bully frogs because basically they will shove any smaller creature they can down their throat in order to consume. So I can see how that'd be problematic. But, it's the sheer incompetence of the program and the cost that came with it that really makes you laugh. I don't know if either of you are familiar with Australia's Great Emu War. It happened quite a long time ago where the Australian military basically decided to eradicate excessive numbers of emus in part of the country. And of course, they lost to the emus, despite the fact that they were equipped with machine guns. So I guess we follow in great historical precedents there of governments simply being unable to handle invasive species. That being said, there is an exception to this. It would be the province of Alberta, God bless it, that has effectively eliminated rats in the province. So if done well, I guess governments can handle invasive species. But with deer and bullfrogs, they just don't seem to understand how to get it done without breaking the bank.
Yeah, we don't have any rats in Alberta of the rodent order. Anyway, Cosmin, what do you think of this? Were you hopping mad?
Well, it just makes me wonder who who devises these plans. Like anybody looking at this situation, I could send my 5-year-old son who loves catching frogs I'll take him on a kayak. All you have to do is promise him a Lego kit and he'd be able to do it within an hour. It's outrageous. Like, and I want to see the cost broken down. What did they spend $10,000 on? Was it the travel expenses? Who are they hiring? It just doesn't make any sense.
How big was their net for the bullfrog? I think we have a picture from my colleague Carson Binda. Here he is, good old Carson. He's our British Columbia director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and he had his press conference in British Columbia just a few minutes ago. And this is a great picture that was snapped by our friends at Western Standard. So thank you so much, Derek and friends, for taking this picture of Carson. And it's wanted, a real bully, Parks Canada. Reward $15,000. So the overall cost was apparently around 15 grand, but specifically narrowed down when you try to narrow down the timeline of catching this one frog, it was around 10 grand per that one frog. So I think my team is trying to get t-shirts made of this thing. So it's one of those ridiculous things, right? Where people will often say, you are defending the government, oh, we can't have cuts. What do you want to cut first? Schooling for little Timmy or healthcare for your grandma. Like, that's not the case, especially at the federal level. They waste gobs of money. This is just one example of them wasting gobs of money for something this silly. And again, I totally understand them trying to say we need to, reduce invasive species. I get that part. Why did they need to blow this much money on it? And why don't they plan better? For folks who are interested, by the way, in those emu wars, I don't know, William, if you've seen it. If you go on YouTube, there's this amazing channel called Oversimplified. It is the best. It's this one dude. I think he used to be a history teacher. And then he got smart and went on YouTube. And it's totally PG. You can watch it with your kids. It's all animated. And that's how I knew about the emu wars, because my son loves Oversimplified. And I sat there and watched it with him. At least he was kept in the Commonwealth, right, William?
Well, I have to laugh that for those of us who have worked for the government and have seen up close how awful government tends to be at actually solving problems and addressing issues, we often think that the government it should be the solution of last resort to dealing with any problem. I think in the case of the deer, they simply let a group of hunters out one sunny afternoon, and they were able to shoot and kill about, I think, 500 deer, more than the government had done with its helicopter sniper program had achieved in all of its other time of existence. And by the way, the cost was zero because, hunters like to hunt deer. That's kind of one of the things they do. So yeah, when people say, oh, we need a solution, we need the government to take this over, I think, well, I hope we've tried literally every other solution first before we're resorting to the inefficiency and incompetence of government to now try and fix this problem.
We started with Reagan and we can end with him. Some of the most scary words in the English language. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Guys, thanks so much for a great chat today.
Thanks. It was great.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks so much for watching Off the Record here on True North. And remember, everything that we have just discussed is off the record.
Yeah, I wish more people who are younger read about Reagan or learned about him. I think they forgot there was a time when things were really cool, and it was the '80s when Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were running two of the biggest most important governments in the world, and they were just getting things done left, right, and center.
Yeah, we actually share a birthday, and I wrote him a letter and said, you share my birthday. We were both Aquarians. And yeah, this is his own biography, the autobiography. And then actually, I don't know if you've read his own diaries.
I haven't yet, no.
It's pretty good because you really get the sense of, it's funny, he was a big movie star, so you'd think he had a big ego. No, it's always this like self-analysis and like, I hope, please God, let me be worthy. I really hope I'm up to this task, like this humble servant sort of approach when talking to himself over and over again. And it's something. Yeah, go ahead, Cosmin.
Is the film like more serious or is it comedic?
No, there's nothing funny about it. Well,
Oh,
he was funny. Like
yeah.
Reagan always had a joke, so his jokes that they put in there are funny. But no,
Yeah.
it was almost to the point of where I'm like, wow, there's almost no real writing in this, because it was like, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Like, it's basically a straight shot.
So
The
it's a
one
history drama, pretty much.
Yep. Very
Yeah.
straight drama, and they didn't create anything. You know what I mean? There was no like weird dialogue back and forth where writers took liberties. The only element that was out even called artistic is the way they framed it. It starts with a young Russian man talking to an old Soviet, and he's like, "Comrade, how did you let Mother Russia go?" And he looks at him. He's like, "There was this one man," and it starts. My one criticism of it is that I think they spent too long on the Hollywood phase. Like, nobody really cares. They should have done that in about 10 minutes, and they spent like close to an hour on it, which was a bit.
Did they do like the McCarthy hearings? Because I'm pretty sure he was called before the Senate committees or the Congress committee. Yeah.
Yep, he was right there on Un-American, blah blah blah. So he was there. They explained why, because he was also, of course, the head of the Actors Guild. So that's how we got to understand unions and how they worked and all that stuff. So they have him there. I think I spotted Ayn Rand in the background. I think they had her there, but I can't be sure because I only watch it in theater. But yeah, I would recommend it. Anybody that's part of the movement, I would recommend it.
Reagan had this crazy idea when it came to the Cold War, set him apart from his predecessor. He said, well, I think we should win and they should lose when it comes to it, which was different than what America had been under Jimmy Carter. So it turns out when that became the goal, they were able to get it done in actually a relatively short amount of time.